The Devil's Debt. Part 1. The Pact. James had always been a man of ambition. When he was young, he had dreams of wealth, power, and fame. But life was not as kind as he had hoped. Struggling in a small apartment, with barely enough money to pay his bills, James grew desperate. One cold evening, as he sat in his dark living room, a voice came to him from the shadows. "Do you want everything you've ever wanted?" the voice asked. James looked around, but there was no one there. "Who's there?" he called out, his heart racing. "I am the one who can give you all that you desire," the voice continued. "All you have to do is give me what I ask for in return." James, frightened but also curious, asked, "What do you want from me?" The voice answered, "I want your soul." At first, James laughed, thinking it was some sort of joke. But as the voice continued, something about it felt real. The offer was tempting. All his troubles could be gone. He would never have to worry about money, about his future, about anything again. "I will give you everything you've ever wanted," the voice promised. "But in exchange, when your time comes, you must surrender your soul to me." In his desperation, James agreed. He shook his head, thinking, what's the worst that could happen? He signed the invisible contract with his soul, not knowing what it truly meant. Years passed, and James forgot all about the strange encounter. His life changed. He became a successful businessman, making millions of dollars. He traveled the world, stayed in expensive hotels, and enjoyed a life of luxury. He met famous people, made powerful friends, and lived the life he had always dreamed of. But every now and then, a strange thought would pop into his mind, like a dark shadow reminding him of something he had forgotten. That was until one night, when James was sitting alone in his office, reviewing documents. The lights flickered. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. The air became thick with tension. He suddenly heard that familiar voice again. "James," the voice said, smooth and cold. "Your time has come." James froze. His heart raced. He stood up, his body shaking. He turned around, and there, standing in front of him, was a tall figure cloaked in dark shadows. He couldn't see its face, but he knew who it was. "The devil," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You've come to collect." The devil's cold voice echoed in the room. "Yes, James. It's time for you to pay the price. Your soul is mine." James stepped back, his mind racing. He had forgotten about the pact. He had forgotten about the promise he made years ago. But now, standing face to face with the reality of his deal, he was filled with fear and regret. I didn't think you would actually come," James said, his voice shaking. "I thought it was just a joke." The devil laughed softly, a sound that sent a shiver through James. "You may have forgotten, but I did not. The deal is real, James. And now, it is time for you to fulfill your part." James's mind raced. He had no idea what to do. The thought of losing his soul terrified him. But then, the devil spoke again. "I can offer you a way out," the devil said, his voice like a whisper in the darkness. "There is one task I need you to complete. Help me with this mission, and your soul will be saved. Fail, and you will be mine forever." James looked at the devil, his mind spinning. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The devil smiled, though James couldn't see it. "I need you to help me destroy the world." James's heart skipped a beat. "What? Destroy the world?" He shook his head in disbelief. "I can't do that. I won't do that." The devil's smile widened. "You have no choice, James. You will do it, or you will lose everything. Your world, your wealth, your power. All of it will mean nothing when your soul is gone." James felt trapped. He had made the deal in a moment of desperation, and now he had to face the consequences. He knew he didn't have a choice. But there was one thing James did know. He had to figure out a way to escape. He couldn't just give up. There had to be another way. The only problem was he didn't know what that way was yet. As the devil's figure slowly faded into the shadows, James felt a sense of dread. He was about to embark on a journey that would change everything, and the price for failure would be far worse than he could ever imagine. But for now, James had one question on his mind. How could he stop the devil without losing everything? And so, the mission began. James sat alone in his office long after the devil had vanished, the air still heavy with the weight of the conversation. He could feel the cold, the strange presence that lingered, even though the room had returned to its normal temperature. His thoughts raced. The world he had built, the life he had dreamt of, all of it was in danger. The devil had made it clear. He had no choice. Help destroy the world, or lose his soul forever. The gravity of the situation was too much for James to process all at once. He paced around the room, trying to calm his frantic mind. How could he possibly help the devil destroy the world? What did that even mean? Was the devil asking him to bring about an apocalypse? Was it a metaphor or something far worse? As the hours passed, the office grew darker, and James felt more isolated. He couldn't trust anyone, not even the people closest to him. Who could he talk to about this? How could he explain that the devil had come to collect his soul, and now he was expected to fulfill a terrible mission? The only person who could understand this was the devil himself. But he was long gone, leaving only fear and confusion in his wake. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. James froze, unsure of what to do. He wasn't expecting anyone. Slowly, he approached the door, peering through the small window. His heart skipped a beat when he saw the figure standing outside. It was a man he didn't recognize, dressed in a dark suit. He looked normal enough, but something about him felt off. The man's eyes were hidden beneath dark sunglasses, and he stood perfectly still as if waiting for something. James hesitated for a moment before opening the door. "Can I help you?" he asked, trying to sound calm despite the knot in his stomach. The man didn't respond right away. Instead, he stepped into the room without asking, his presence unsettling. "I've been looking for you, James," he said, his voice low and smooth, almost too calm. "You've made a deal, haven't you?" James's heart pounded in his chest. "What are you talking about?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You know exactly what I mean. The deal with the devil. You think you can escape it, but you can't. The devil's plans are already set in motion." James's mind raced. How did this man know about the pact? Could he be another agent of the devil, sent to ensure James followed through? The thought made him shiver. "Who are you?" James asked, his voice barely a whisper. The man took a step closer, his gaze never leaving James's face. "I am someone who knows what happens when a soul is sold. I've seen it before." He paused, his eyes darkening. "And I've seen what happens when people try to break free." James's hands clenched into fists. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't know what I was doing back then. I just wanted a better life." The man nodded, but his expression remained cold. "We all want something, James. The devil doesn't care about your desires. He only cares about your soul." James felt a wave of panic rise within him. "What am I supposed to do?" he asked desperately. "How can I stop this? How can I undo the deal?" The man's lips curled into a faint smile. "You can't undo it. But there's a way to delay it. You'll have to work with the devil, play his game. But the consequences are never what they seem." James's mind raced. He needed to understand more. "What do you mean? What kind of game is he playing? How can I survive it?" The man's eyes glinted behind his sunglasses. "You'll have to destroy something. Something important. But it won't be just anything. It will be something close to your heart. You may think you're saving your soul, but in the end, you'll lose something far more precious." James's heart sank. What could the devil possibly want him to destroy? His wealth? His family? His own happiness? The thought was unbearable. But he had no choice. He had already made the deal. The devil would come for him again, and if he didn't do what was asked, he would lose everything. The man turned to leave, his footsteps echoing through the silent room. "Remember, James," he said, his voice soft but firm, "the devil doesn't play fair. You'll think you can win, but you'll always be a step behind." James stood frozen, his mind spinning. What had just happened? Who was that man? Was he another agent of the devil or someone trying to warn him? The whole conversation felt like a nightmare that wouldn't end. As he sat back down at his desk, the weight of the situation pressed down on him harder than ever. He couldn't sit idly by, hoping this was all a bad dream. He had to do something. But what? What was the devil's mission? And how could he possibly stop it without losing everything? Suddenly, his phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. The message on the screen sent a chill through him. It was from an unknown number. Your first task begins tomorrow. Prepare yourself. James's heart pounded in his chest. He was running out of time. The devil had made it clear. There was no escaping this. And tomorrow, he would begin the mission that would determine his fate. He didn't know what to expect, but one thing was certain. His world was about to change in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. The suspense, the fear, and the thrill of what was to come gnawed at him as the clock ticked down to midnight. The next morning, James woke up with a start, his heart still racing from the events of the previous night. He had barely slept, the fear gnawing at him, preventing any real rest. His mind kept replaying the conversation with the mysterious man. What had he meant by, "The devil doesn't play fair"? Was it a warning? Or was it just another piece of the twisted game he was now trapped in? James glanced at the clock on his bedside table. It was already late. He had to be at the office soon, but the weight of what was happening overwhelmed him. The message from the unknown number kept echoing in his head. Your first task begins tomorrow. Prepare yourself. The words haunted him. What did it mean? What was the devil planning for him? Trying to shake off the sense of dread, he pushed himself out of bed. He got dressed and headed to the office, each step feeling heavier than the last. He couldn't focus on anything else. Every thought seemed to circle back to the deal, to the devil, to the task he had to complete. When James entered his office, the usual hum of business felt distant and foreign. His assistant greeted him with a polite smile, but he couldn't return it. She asked if he was okay, but he just nodded, trying to hide the panic building up inside. He couldn't explain this to anyone. Not yet. No one would understand. They would think he was losing his mind. As the day dragged on, James found it impossible to concentrate on work. His thoughts kept returning to the message. Every time his phone buzzed, his stomach lurched. What if it was another message from the devil? What if it was time to begin the task? The day went by in a blur. By the time the evening arrived, James was exhausted, both physically and mentally. He was about to leave the office when his phone buzzed again. His hands trembled as he picked it up, almost afraid to read the message. It's time. Go to the old warehouse on 6th Avenue. The clock is ticking. His heart skipped a beat. A warehouse? What did the devil want him to do there? The place was old and abandoned, far away from the city's bustling streets. Why would he need to go there? He felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. But he knew there was no turning back now. If he didn't follow through, he would lose everything. His soul, his wealth, his life. James didn't waste a second. He grabbed his coat and rushed out of the office, the cool evening air biting at his skin. He drove through the streets in a daze, his mind racing. Every stoplight, every turn, felt like it could be his last. What awaited him at the warehouse? What kind of test was he about to face? When he finally arrived, the warehouse loomed in front of him, dark and silent, with only the faint sound of the wind rustling through the broken windows. It looked abandoned, forgotten by time. But James knew better than to think it was just a building. There was something else here, something darker. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach. He stepped out of his car, his footsteps echoing in the empty street. The air felt thick, heavy with an unseen presence. James hesitated for a moment, staring at the door to the warehouse. It looked old, rusty, as if it hadn't been opened in years. But somehow, it felt like it was waiting for him. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, the sound of it disturbing the quiet of the night. Inside, the warehouse was filled with shadows, the only light coming from a flickering bulb hanging overhead. The place smelled musty, like dust and decay. James stepped forward, his every instinct screaming at him to turn and run. But he couldn't. Not now. As he walked deeper into the warehouse, he noticed a figure standing at the far end. It was a man, tall and imposing, but there was something unnatural about the way he stood. His back was straight, his arms at his sides, as if he had been waiting for James to arrive. The figure was completely still. Yet James could feel his presence as if it were pressing down on him, suffocating him. James's heart pounded in his chest. He tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. The figure didn't move, didn't say a word. And then, the air seemed to shift. It felt colder, denser, as if the darkness itself was closing in on him. Finally, the figure spoke. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried across the room with a strange, unnatural force. "You're late," the man said, his tone calm but carrying an edge of menace. James swallowed hard, his mouth dry. I'm here now. What do you want from me?" The figure didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped forward, the shadows seemingly shifting around him as he moved. He stopped just a few feet in front of James, and for the first time, James saw his face. The man's eyes were dark, cold, and empty, like two bottomless pits. "You know what you have to do," the man said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The task is simple. Destroy the thing that you hold most dear." James's heart dropped. Destroy the thing he loved most? What could that mean? His wealth, his career, his family? He couldn't even begin to imagine what the devil had in mind. But he knew that this was the moment when everything would change. He had no choice. The man smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was cruel, twisted, and James knew that whatever was about to happen, it would change his life forever. "You don't understand, do you?" the man said. "The task isn't just about destruction. It's about sacrifice. You will give up something of yourself, something that can never be replaced. Only then will the devil be satisfied." James's mind raced, his thoughts swirling in a frenzy. What could he possibly sacrifice? What was he willing to give up to escape this nightmare? But as the man's words sank in, James realized there was no escape. He was trapped, bound by the deal he had made so many years ago, and now there was no turning back. The only question left was, what would he be willing to lose to survive? James stood frozen, the man's words echoing in his mind. The air around him seemed to thicken, pressing down on him as if the entire warehouse were alive, watching him, waiting for his next move. His heart hammered in his chest, the sound loud in his ears. He had never felt so small, so powerless. The task ahead of him felt impossible. And yet, he knew there was no way out. The devil's deal had already been made. His fate was sealed. The figure in front of him stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. Every step the man took seemed to draw James deeper into a web of fear and uncertainty. The man's cold eyes pierced into him, and James could almost feel the weight of his gaze on his very soul. "I'm not going to ask again," the man said, his voice barely a murmur. "Destroy the thing you love most, or everything you've ever known will be gone. Your soul, your life, your future. All will be taken from you." James opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His mind was racing, but everything felt like it was moving in slow motion. He wanted to ask what the man meant, what the devil truly wanted him to do. But deep down he already knew. The thing he loved most, the thing he had worked so hard for, the one thing that had defined his life, his family, his career, his wealth, could all be taken from him in an instant. His hands trembled, and his palms grew clammy. What was he supposed to do? How could he destroy something that was so precious to him? Could he even bring himself to do it? The very thought of it made him sick to his stomach. The figure watched him closely, sensing the internal struggle. "You still don't understand, do you?" the man said, his tone almost pitying. "You've already made the deal. The devil doesn't care about your hesitations. You'll do this, whether you want to or not. It's the price of your soul." James clenched his fists, trying to steady himself. He couldn't just stand here and do nothing. He had to make a decision, one way or another. If he refused to carry out the task, he knew the consequences would be severe. But if he obeyed, if he destroyed what was most dear to him, what would be left of his life? Would he even be the same person after that? "You have a choice," the man continued, his voice growing more insistent. "You can sacrifice the one thing you love, or you can lose everything. The devil has already set the wheels in motion. This is your moment of truth." The words felt like a cold slap, each one reverberating through James's body. He closed his eyes, trying to think, trying to find some way out. But there was nothing. He had made a mistake so long ago, a mistake that was now coming back to haunt him. And the consequences were far worse than he had ever imagined. The man's eyes glinted in the dim light. "You should know, James, that you're not the first to make such a deal. Many have come before you, and many will come after. The devil never lets go once he has you. But if you do as he asks, you might survive. You might even come out the other side stronger." But don't think for a second that it will be easy. James swallowed hard, his throat dry. The weight of the decision was unbearable. What would he sacrifice? What was he willing to lose to save his soul? His mind flashed to his family, the people who had always been there for him, the ones he loved most. Could he really destroy them, or was there another way? The figure took another step forward, his face now inches from James's. "There's no going back," he whispered, his breath cold against James's skin. "Once you make the choice, it will be too late to change your mind. The devil will claim what's his, and nothing will save you. Think carefully, James. Your time is running out." Suddenly, the air seemed to shift again, growing colder, heavier. James could feel the darkness closing in, pressing in on him from all sides. He took a step back, his chest tightening with panic. The warehouse, once silent, now felt alive with an oppressive presence, as if the building itself was a living, breathing entity. "Where do I begin?" James asked, his voice shaking. He didn't know if he was asking the man in front of him or the devil himself. All he knew was that he had no choice but to follow through. The weight of the decision crushed him, but it seemed as though there was no other path. The figure smiled, a cold, sinister smile that made James's skin crawl. "The first task is simple," he said. "You will go to your home tonight. You will find the one thing you hold most dear, the thing that means the most to you, and you will destroy it. Do it, and the devil will be pleased. Fail, and you will suffer the consequences." James's mind raced. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. His family, his life, his possessions, all of it was in danger. How could he destroy the very thing that kept him grounded? How could he betray himself like that? But the man's words were clear, and the darkness in the room was suffocating. He had no other choice. "You have until midnight," the man said, his voice cold and final. "That's when the devil will come for you. Be ready." With those words, the figure turned and began to walk away, fading into the shadows of the warehouse. James stood there for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. The decision weighed on him like 1,000 tons. He had no idea what to do. All he knew was that his world was about to be torn apart, and he was powerless to stop it. He left the warehouse in a daze, the streets blurring around him as he drove home. The clock was ticking. He had until midnight to make his choice, and the closer he got to his house, the more the pressure mounted. What was he going to do? How could he go through with it? The house seemed almost normal when he arrived, lights glowing softly through the windows. His family was inside, safe and unaware of the darkness that had come for him. The thought of them, their smiles, their laughter, sent a pang of guilt through his chest. How could he destroy everything that made his life meaningful? But the devil's grip was tight, and it was closing in. If he didn't obey, there would be nothing left for him. James stepped inside the house, his heart in his throat. He knew what he had to do, but that didn't make it any easier. As he walked through the rooms, everything seemed to fade into the background. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him, and the silence in the house felt deafening. He looked around, wondering where to start. What was it that he loved most? Was it his family, his wealth, his career? The answer came to him like a sudden, painful realization. He knew what the devil wanted him to destroy, and it was something he could never get back. The clock was ticking. The task had begun. James stood still in the middle of his living room, his heart pounding. The house was quiet, too quiet. Every creak of the floorboards beneath his feet seemed amplified, and every shadow seemed to move on its own. His mind raced with conflicting thoughts, each one trying to make sense of the impossible choice that had been forced upon him. The air around him felt thick, as if it were closing in, pressing down on him with the weight of his own desperation. He glanced at the clock on the wall. Midnight was drawing near, the hands ticking steadily, reminding him of the one thing that would happen when the clock struck 12. James knew what was at stake. If he didn't follow through, if he didn't destroy what the devil demanded, everything he had would be ripped away. His life, his family, his future. All of it would be gone in the blink of an eye. But how could he destroy the very thing he loved most? How could he betray himself, his family, the very core of his existence? His hands trembled as he reached for the door that led to the study, the place where it all began. His mind flashed back to the moment when he made that cursed deal, the moment when he had foolishly thought he could outsmart the devil. How naive he had been. Now he was paying the price, and there was no escape. James opened the door, stepping inside. The room was dark, the only light coming from the moonlight filtering through the blinds. His eyes swept over the shelves filled with books, the desk piled with papers, the family pictures on the wall. Everything seemed so normal, so innocent. But behind it all, there was a darker truth, a truth that was about to come crashing down on him. The devil had been clear. Destroy what he loved most. But what was it? His family, his wealth, his career? The answer seemed to elude him, no matter how much he searched his mind. He had worked so hard for everything he had, built his life from the ground up. How could he just throw it all away? He walked over to the desk, his gaze falling on the framed photograph of his wife and children. A wave of guilt washed over him. He had promised them everything. He had promised to protect them, to keep them safe. And now he was about to tear that promise apart. His hands shook as he reached for the photo, his fingers brushing against the glass. It seemed so simple, so innocent. But in that moment, he knew it was the thing that the devil wanted him to destroy. The room seemed to grow colder, the darkness pressing in on him like a living thing. He could feel the devil's presence, could almost hear its voice in the back of his mind, whispering to him, urging him to do it. Destroy it, James, the voice said, low and menacing. Destroy the thing you love most, or everything will be taken from you. James's breath hitched in his throat. He couldn't do it. He couldn't destroy his family. He loved them too much. But what choice did he have? The clock was ticking. Midnight was getting closer, and with it, the devil's wrath. He stumbled back from the desk, his mind spinning. What was he supposed to do? Was there any way to escape this nightmare? His thoughts were a jumble of confusion and fear. He glanced at the clock again, his pulse quickening as the minutes slipped away. He couldn't wait any longer. He had to make a decision. Just as he was about to turn away, something caught his eye. It was a small box, tucked away in the corner of the desk. James frowned, not remembering putting it there. He walked over and opened it, his heart racing. Inside was an old, weathered notebook, something that looked like it belonged to his father. His fingers trembled as he picked it up, flipping through the pages. The writing was faded, but the words were still clear. It was a journal, filled with entries about his father's dealings with the devil, his own failed attempts to break free from the same curse that had now claimed James's soul. James's breath caught in his throat. He had no idea his father had made a deal with the devil. He never spoke of it. But now, here it was, right in front of him. The journal detailed his father's own descent into madness, his own desperate attempts to save his family and soul. Each page revealed the same grim truth. Once you made a deal with the devil, there was no escape. But as he turned the pages, one entry caught his eye. It was a plea for help, a final message to James. His father had written that there was a way out, a way to break the curse. But it would come at a great cost. The words were haunting. If you are reading this, James, you must destroy the source of the deal, the thing that gave the devil power over you. It will not be easy, and you may not survive. But it is the only way. The room seemed to spin as James read those words again and again. Was this the answer he had been looking for? Was there a way to break free from the devil's grip? But if there was a way out, why hadn't his father found it? Why hadn't he been able to save himself? Suddenly, a loud bang sounded from downstairs, breaking James's concentration. His heart leaped in his chest, and he rushed to the window, his eyes scanning the yard below. Nothing. The house was quiet, just as it had been moments ago, but the silence felt wrong, like it was hiding something. He had to finish this, and quickly. Midnight was almost here. James turned away from the window, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on him. The devil's deal was closing in on him, and he had no idea what would happen when the clock struck 12. The journal in his hands felt heavier now, as though it were pulling him toward some unseen fate. He had to act. But what was the source of the deal? Was it his family, his career, or was it something deeper, something he had yet to understand? He glanced down at the photograph of his family again, his heart aching with the thought of destroying everything he loved. But what choice did he have? James's mind raced as he tried to put the pieces together. The journal said he had to destroy the source of the deal, but it didn't say how. How could he destroy something he didn't even understand? The devil's grip was tightening around him, and he could feel it. Time was running out. The sound of footsteps from behind startled him. He spun around, his heart in his throat. The figure in the shadows stepped forward, his cold eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Do you know what you must do, James?" the figure asked, his voice smooth and chilling. James could only nod, though his mind was still clouded with doubt and fear. He knew what he had to do, but it didn't make it any easier. The clock was ticking, and the devil was waiting. There was no turning back now. The figure's smile was cold, and James could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His fate was sealed. The only question now was whether he would survive it. James stood in the cold, dimly lit room, feeling the weight of the moment more than ever. His heart was racing, his mind spinning, and the world outside seemed to have disappeared into a blur of shadows. He could hear the faint ticking of the clock from the hallway, each tick counting down the seconds, dragging him closer to the moment of reckoning. Midnight was approaching fast, and with it, the devil's demands. The figure in the corner, cloaked in darkness, stared at him with a chilling, almost predatory gaze. James couldn't tell whether it was a person or something else entirely. The figure's eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, unsettling him with their intensity. "You've reached the end of your path, James," the voice rang out, cold and menacing. "You can't run anymore. The deal is due, and there is only one way to save yourself now." James swallowed hard, his throat dry as dust. "I've been trying to find another way, but there is no way out. No escape." The figure smiled, its teeth gleaming in the darkness. A smile that sent a shiver through James's entire body. "Escape? There is no escape, James. You belong to me. You always have." His chest tightened, panic surging in his veins. "What do you want me to destroy? Tell me, what's the source of the deal?" His voice trembled as he spoke, his fear bubbling up in his chest like a fever. The journal his father had left him swirled in his mind. Its final, desperate words, "Destroy the source. The source is you," the figure said, the words cold and final. "The thing you love most, the thing that gives you strength, is what I need. It is your very essence, and you must destroy it before the clock strikes 12. James's blood ran cold. The source? His essence, his entire life, his family, his memories, everything he had worked so hard for, was being turned against him. The figure stepped forward, its presence overwhelming, like the air itself was bending under its weight. He felt suffocated, trapped. The walls seemed to close in on him. "You have a choice," the figure continued, its voice low, almost a whisper now. "You can destroy the thing you love most, or I will take it from you anyway. You won't be able to stop me. The time has come, James. You know what must be done." James clenched his fists, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. He couldn't do it. He couldn't destroy his family. He couldn't destroy the very things that had given him purpose in life. But was that the only way to survive? Was there no other option? The devil's grip was tightening, and there was no escaping it. He could feel the pressure building in the air, the weight of the impending doom suffocating him. "I won't do it," James finally said, his voice shaking but resolute. "I won't destroy my family. I won't destroy my love." The figure laughed, the sound sending a wave of ice down James's spine. "Ah, you think you can resist. You think you have a choice, don't you? But you don't, James. You've already made your choice the day you signed that deal. You've already sold your soul to me, and now I am here to collect." The room seemed to grow colder still, and James could feel a dark energy swirling around him, pressing against his chest. He gasped for air, feeling as if he were being suffocated by invisible hands. His knees trembled, but he fought to stay on his feet, refusing to give in. Suddenly, the figure moved with terrifying speed, its shadowy form flickering in the dim light like a blur. Before James could react, a cold, iron grip seized him by the arm, pulling him toward the center of the room. His breath caught in his throat, and his heart hammered in his chest. This was it. The end. The moment he had dreaded for so long was finally here. "I gave you a chance," the figure hissed in his ear. "But now you have no choice. I will take it all from you, James. Everything you love." James's mind was reeling. What had he done? Why had he ever made the deal? He had thought he could control it, thought he could outsmart the devil. But now it was clear. There was no outsmarting this evil. It had been waiting for this moment, biding its time, and now it was here to claim him. His thoughts flickered back to his family, his wife, his children. He could see their faces in his mind's eye, their smiles, their love. He had promised them everything. He had promised to keep them safe. And now, in this moment, it felt like everything was slipping through his fingers. The devil's grip on him was unrelenting, tightening around him like a vice. "Please," James begged, his voice cracking with desperation. "There must be another way. Please, tell me there's another way." The figure paused, its dark gaze fixed on James. For a moment, the silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the sound of James's ragged breathing. Then, in a voice that was almost pitying, the figure spoke again. "There is another way, James, but it comes at a price you may not be willing to pay. You can escape the deal, but to do so, you must destroy the thing that gives me power over you. The thing that you hold dear. You must destroy it willingly, without hesitation. And if you succeed, the deal will be nullified." James's heart raced in his chest, a flicker of hope sparking in his mind. There was a way out. There was still a chance. But the cost was unimaginable. To destroy the very thing that gave the devil power over him. What did that even mean? Could he really do it? Could he truly give up everything he loved to save himself? The figure's eyes narrowed. You have 1 minute. The clock is ticking. James felt a surge of panic flood his veins. 1 minute. He had only 1 minute to decide the fate of his entire life. It was too much, too fast. He felt like he was suffocating, trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. But then, as the figure's grip loosened, James heard a soft whisper in his mind. A memory, a voice from the past. It was his father's voice, from the journal he had found earlier. You can destroy the source, James, but it will cost you. It will cost you everything. But if you do it, you will be free. Freedom. That was the key. The freedom to live. The freedom to choose his own path. Was it worth the cost? Was it worth the sacrifice? With only seconds left, James knew what he had to do. He stepped forward, taking a deep breath. The time had come. The choice was his. And there was no turning back. James took a deep breath, his mind racing as the seconds ticked away. His body trembled. But he knew this was the only way. The devil's grip had loosened for a moment, giving him just enough space to make a choice. The whispers of his father echoed in his mind once more, urging him to act without hesitation. He turned toward the figure, his voice steady despite the chaos inside him. "I will destroy it," he said, his heart heavy with the weight of the decision. "I will destroy everything I love, if that's what it takes to free myself." The figure's eyes gleamed, as though it had been waiting for this moment. "So be it," it hissed, and in that instant, the room seemed to shudder, as though the very walls were closing in on him. James's hand reached out, his fingers trembling as they touched the journal his father had left him. The weight of the book in his hands felt like the weight of his entire life. With one final look at the life he had built, the family he cherished, he opened the book to its final page. It was the last step. The moment he tore the page from the book, the figure screamed in fury, its form distorting and twisting in pain. The darkness around him seemed to dissipate, and with a final, shattering roar, the devil's hold over him was broken. James felt the weight lift from his shoulders as the room grew still. The clock had stopped. The deal was over. He had sacrificed everything, but in that sacrifice, he had won his freedom. As the first light of dawn crept through the window, James stood alone, a man reborn. His heart ached, but he knew that he had done what was necessary. The darkness had been defeated, and he was finally free. The world outside was waiting, and though his soul had been scarred, he had survived. And that, in the end, was enough. That's the end of the story. If you enjoyed the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more exciting tales. Check out our other videos and share your thoughts in the comments. Stay tuned for the next adventure. Thanks for watching.